Have you ever agreed to something you already knew you didn't want to do? Or have you ever left a conversation feeling mentally drained because maybe you never said what you actually needed to say or wanted to say? Now, if you answered yes to either of these questions, you may have noticed or perhaps pretended not to notice that this unresolved tension ends up following you for far longer than the task itself. And what I mean by task is saying what you actually needed to say or addressing a boundary that was crossed. And then what happens is this unresolved tension distracts your focus. It could be for hours after the thing that happened or didn't happen that needed to, could be days, sometimes it could even be weeks. And a lot of times we might feel like we're overwhelmed by our workload, but if you're feeling overwhelmed, you might actually be overwhelmed by internal conflict. So, what are some examples of internal conflict? Well, avoiding a difficult conversation, trying to suppress the frustration that you're actually feeling, moving in a direction that doesn't feel aligned. So, moving forward with a misaligned initiative for too long could even be just pretending like you're okay when really you're not feeling okay. And when we carry this emotional pressure silently, this is another example of internal conflict. Internal conflict can also show up in behaviors like not clearly setting boundaries or people pleasing. And a lot of times in professional environments, we feel like just that natural tendency to suppress our emotions. But this internal conflict can create what's called emotional residue. And then that unresolved tension ends up consuming a lot of mental energy. And so when you're trying to get your work done, but you're working with a distracted focus, we can feel more overwhelmed by our work because it's taking you longer to get the work done, more effort for less payout. And yes, we're often taught we need to manage our emotions in professional environments. We want to maintain composure, we want to filter our reactions, and we may feel pressure sometimes to project confidence, especially as a leader if you're leading a team, when really you're feeling pressure. They call this, or research calls this, surface acting, putting on an appropriate emotional expression while you're masking how you really feel. But this creates internal conflict and anxiety, and it can lead to emotional exhaustion when you're carrying the pressure that you're actually feeling privately rather than expressing it and working with yourself rather than against yourself. And it can seem in professional environments like it's rewarding to control our emotions, but suppressing your emotions is not the same thing as emotional regulation. And emotional or suppressing your emotions might feel like you're protecting yourself initially, but then that unresolved tension is going to show up. It's going to leak out somewhere. It could be in communication, and it could be in behavior or in rushed emotional decision making. So an example would be, smiling when you're feeling frustrated. That can lead to internal resentment and this an emotional strain, which can show up later as well in how we show up. It could show up as irritability or disengagement rather than dealing with the person that you need to have the conversation with, or the team. You start to disengage, or communication styles can shift from direct and clear to passive aggressive, or maybe avoidance, burnout, unclear communication. So these are all some of the challenges that result from not properly regulating your emotions and instead suppressing your emotions. And the main underlying theme with internal conflict is that you are going against yourself. So, for example, when you examples of going against yourself, saying yes when you really mean no, avoiding setting clear and specific boundaries, staying silent to avoid discomfort. Those times in meetings or in business conversations where you feel that hesitation, that resistance. Your intuition is saying, I need to speak up here, but it's going to be uncomfortable. So we stay silent to avoid that discomfort. And sometimes it can mean overextending ourselves, going against ourselves when we know, what, my plate is too full. I don't have the bandwidth to work on this additional project here. But when we say yes, we start to overextend ourselves. And all of these examples, what you're doing is ignoring your intuition. And the more the less we listen to our intuition, the quieter it gets, and then this can lead to increasing anxiety because we're not trusting ourselves. And the issue here is not so much the task itself, the task meaning that uncomfortable conversation that we need to have, dealing with the actual issue. That's the task itself. The problem, the issue really comes in, is that the internal conflict that the attention that the internal conflict creates. So you already know the answer, but you go against yourself, and then that internal conflict. And the clear conversation, communication, the boundary that needed to be set probably would take about 30 seconds. Not doesn't mean it's easy, it's uncomfortable, but then when we avoid it, it later can cost hours of mental energy. And this unresolved conflict, then it drains your focus, because research shows part of your brain is still focusing on the task that hasn't been resolved. And in addition to the research, I'm sure, just like myself, you likely have many examples from your own past experience where you didn't deal with something and you kept replaying the conversation in your head, or where your focus kept getting distracted. So if you're noticing some overwhelm at work, some frustration, some reflective questions that you could ask yourself to help you get to the issue, to help you figure out your next step, could be, where am I currently going against myself? Or what is the conversation that I'm avoiding? Or what feels frustrating that I'm trying to push away? What's the uncomfortable feeling? Or what boundary continues to get crossed where you're feeling that resistance that needs your attention? Or where is there a problem that you're pretending doesn't exist? Or just a simple overall question that you can ask yourself. I like to do this each morning, and just as part of the start to my day, just checking in with myself, is, check in with how you're feeling. And whenever you notice something bothering you, especially when it just starts as a small, uncomfortable emotion, ask yourself, what is bugging me? And really just give yourself a moment to focus in on that frustration. Anything that is getting your attention, that's bugging you, that is frustrating you, is showing up to as data. And that's what your emotions are. Emotions, yes, they can sometimes be distracting, but they're more than just interruptions. Emotions are information. And when you use that information and then get curious, this is how you identify the problem. And then once you identify the problem, well, then the solution surfaces. And then that's where you have your next action step. And a lot of times the solution was always there, but when we're trying to ignore the problem, the uncomfortable emotion, well, then the solution doesn't have space to show up. But then when we zoom out and shift our perspective around uncomfortable emotions, frustrations, and instead view them as information, well, then you have space for the solution to show up. When you're trying to push away the problem, the solution can't surface. And I referenced some of the articles that I referenced in the discussion today. I linked down below. Well, I didn't link them down below, but I put them down below. And I really like the title the title from one of them really stands out for me. It's The Best Leaders Normalize Emotion at Work. When leaders are trying to conceal their frustration, whether you are leading a team or leading your own life, strong leadership starts with self-leadership. So if you're feeling frustrated and you're not dealing with it, that can show up as resentment. When you're feeling anxious, that anxiety needs your attention. And when we don't deal with these uncomfortable emotions, it can lead to emotional overload and exhaustion. So a different way, or a way that you can work to shift your perspective if you find yourself sometimes ignoring these uncomfortable emotions and trying to stay focused on your work, you're maybe trying to be more efficient and get things done. Instead of blaming yourself or judging yourself, like, for example, well, I shouldn't be feeling this way, ask yourself a different question. What is the emotion trying to tell you? Remember, emotions are data. So what is this information trying to tell you, trying to show you? When we ignore the information, well, then we're not working with all of the information that we have in our decision making. So for example, if you're feeling frustrated with an initiative at work, well, you might be not aligned with that initiative. And so this frustration is showing up. Maybe you have a different way of doing of executing the task, and that might be your way, might be a more innovative way. So you speaking up could help the team and the overall initiative. Or if there's a boundary issue, sometimes if we're feeling resentment, it could be toward a friend, could be toward a coworker, or just with a situation, it's likely that a boundary is being crossed. And you'll know because you feel tightness, you feel resistance. Again, it always comes back to the emotion. So you don't want to ignore the emotions, you want to deal with them. And then, so if you recognize that you're feeling resentful and you get curious about what's the emotion, where is it coming from, why is it there, and that can lead you to, okay, this boundary is being crossed. And then that identification of the problem can lead you to your next action step. So I need to set a clear boundary here. And then you can get curious about, okay, how can I do this in a diplomatic way that's clear and direct? Or if you're feeling anxious, that emotion might be indicative of lack of clarity. I've seen this in working with teams before. One example would be where a leader sets the initiative or the goal, but the team member doesn't have a clear understanding of the actual goal. So it's very challenging, if not impossible, to hit a target, to accomplish a task that we can't see in our minds, that we can't envision. So then we don't feel very confident and secure in our ability to execute on the task, and we can start to feel anxious, and then that can lead to procrastination. So these are just examples of emotions that may be showing up that need your attention. Another one would be if you're feeling exhausted, if you're feeling overwhelmed. Well, the work and the way that you're going about the work or the ask could be not sustainable, right? Whenever we're feeling overwhelmed, or this might be indicative of, you know what, I'm not going to be able to keep this up. So this emotion needs your attention so that you can figure out a different solution. So how can you, when you start to pay closer attention to your emotions, well, that's how you better understand yourself. And this is how you better elevate your self-awareness. So the first step is to notice what is getting your attention, and then let it get your attention. Get curious before reacting. So this is information, uncomfortable emotions, information, data that can inform your action, your next step. And awareness is the first step to increasing your emotional intelligence. And then when you have a better understanding of yourself, because backing up real quick, when you're ignoring your uncomfortable emotions, because let's face it, it's uncomfortable, I don't want to deal with them, and it's distracting me, I'm trying to focus, I'm trying to get my work done. But if you stop and notice the emotion that's trying to get your attention, and pause for just a minute or two and allow yourself to get curious about it, well, then that process is likely to lead you to a new action that's going to result in a better outcome, which will take a lot less time to just stop and sort of give in and let yourself feel the feeling rather than trying to push through. And then also the more you do this, the better you understand yourself. And then as another byproduct of your increasing your self-awareness, you're going to elevate your social awareness, because when we don't understand our own emotions while we are feeling the way we're feeling, and we don't deal with our own issues or challenges, well, then how are we able to understand others, especially if you're leading a team, or if you're just an empathetic person who demonstrates leadership qualities, and so people naturally come to you with their own challenges or frustrations. The better you can interpret and process your own challenges and emotions, well, the better you're going to be able to then impact and influence others. So there's great benefits to paying attention to your emotions, and one of which is increasing self and social awareness, in addition to solving the challenges faster. So when you better understand your own emotions, you naturally become less defensive, less reactive, because what we want as humans is to be understood. But to be understood by others, you first have to understand yourself. And if you notice, I notice this, which is why I like to get very curious and continue to sort of go down a rabbit hole of curiosity. Okay, so what am I feeling? Identify the emotion. Okay, well, why am I feeling like this? Okay, but then why? And go deeper and deeper with it. And it only takes a few minutes, maybe like 5, 10, 15 minutes versus days, weeks, months, sometimes even years of not dealing with a challenge, that challenge is just going to get bigger and follow you around. But what I noticed myself about going through this process of pausing, stopping, noticing how I'm feeling, identifying the emotion, getting curious about where it's coming from, well, then I come to a better understanding of myself. And then instantly I feel better, regardless of whether or not I have resolved the issue yet, because maybe resolving the problem is going to involve some other people. But I feel better myself because first I understand myself. And the more you do that for yourself, the better you're going to be able to understand others, including your team members. And then when we have that connection, when we have that understanding, first with ourselves and then with others, well, we're less likely to take things personal because we understand. Okay, well, example would be, when I'm frustrated, when something's bugging me, I might show up this way. Or if I show up as passive aggressive in my behavior, well, it's because I'm really feeling this way. So if we know that within ourselves, about ourselves, then we can recognize that in others, and then we don't take it personally. And all of this helps you to elevate your state of mind and choose your responses and your actions rather than reacting. And then as a leader, if you are leading a team, or if you are, a thought leader, individual contributor, where people come to you for your opinion, maybe a trainer, high performer, where you naturally sort of garner respect within your organization. When you pay attention to and deal with your own emotions at work, well, then you model that behavior for others on your team. And then what happens, whether it's a spoken rule or not, is that other team members are going to feel more empowered to then deal with, confront, share their own challenges. So for example, instead of thinking or saying, everything's fine, it'll blow over, let me just stay focused on what I'm working on. Instead, you're encouraging the behavior of acknowledging the challenge. Here's the challenge. Here's the information. Here's what we know. All right, now let's figure out what we're going to do next. It's empowering to deal with your emotions and challenges rather than trying to suppress them and then mentally draining and exhausting yourself, because we can spend so much mental energy doing what we think is protecting ourselves from having the uncomfortable conversation when we feel like the environment is unsafe. But to a result of psychological safety in teams and in the workplace is more innovation. Speaking up, saying, I'm not aligned with this initiative. Actually, here's what I think could be maybe a better way of doing things. So more innovation, faster problem solving. When you acknowledge the problem, speak up about it, first with yourself and then with others. And psychological safety leads to more trust across teams and better communication, collaboration, and healthier and faster conflict resolution. So just recapping, the internal conflict is expensive because our time is valuable. We can't get our time back. So the longer we take to deal with an issue, well, the bigger it gets and the more it's going to distract you. And then what happens is you get less done with more effort. Whereas when you stop and pause and take note of how you're feeling and deal with the challenge, you put time back on your calendar. And by demonstrating this behavior of dealing with your emotions at work as a leader, you are, or just as part of a team, you're encouraging this, you're demonstrating this behavior across your team. Stronger self-awareness, emotional honesty, boundary setting, and actually processing your emotions rather than ignoring them. So a couple of reflective questions that I'll leave you with, and I invite you to ask yourself one of these questions or see if there's one that is applying to you at work this week. What is there a tension that's been unresolved that you've been sort of quietly carrying? Or what conversation needs to happen? Is there a conversation that you've been avoiding, or where is there some clarity that needs to be further discussed? Or what uncomfortable emotion could be? A lot of times we like to ignore our uncomfortable emotions, but a more useful way to deal with uncomfortable emotions is to ask ourselves, okay, what might this emotion be trying to tell me? So remember, your emotions are, while even the uncomfortable ones, especially the uncomfortable emotions, they're information. When you shift your perspective to look at to see emotions as data, as information trying to point you towards something useful, well, then you will probably be more likely to deal with, process your emotions. And then you could also ask yourself, okay, if I stop pretending that this situation is fine, what would change? And then that these reflection questions are meant to help you take action if in these uncomfortable situations where we don't want to deal with the challenge, just yeah, because it's uncomfortable. But what happens when we stop fighting what we already know, what your intuition is trying to speak up and tell you? That's when the solution shows up. And a lot of times it's been there all along, but we can't see the solution when we're ignoring the problem. And when we're ignoring our emotions, we're actually ignoring ourselves. And you can alleviate a lot of stress and increase your focus just by letting what is getting your attention actually get your attention. So I like to say, focus on the frustration. Ask yourself, what is bugging me? This is a super powerful question. So first, pause, notice, acknowledge. Awareness is always the first step in overcoming any challenge, achieving any goal, and then get curious about it. And then from there, and then remember to shift your perspective around sitting with the discomfort to understanding that, hey, this is going to give you your next step. You'll be able to see a clear direction and surface a solution once you let what's getting your attention actually get your attention. My name is Amy Miller, and I work with leaders and teams on clearer communication, decision-making, leadership presence, and addressing these kinds of issues that quietly impact team performance inside organizations. And yeah, if this is something that you or your team are currently navigating and you'd like to continue the conversation, you're welcome to book a call on my calendar. You can also message me, coach or workshop. And you can check out my books, courses, and workshops at amyleemiller.com. All right, just checking to see if there are any questions. Last week, I missed a question at the very end, so I apologize for that. I'll do better about checking to see if there are any comments or questions before I hop off. And I did go back and do a video on that. So if I missed your question last week, I did post a video to help answer your question. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.